Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. My name is Peter McLeod. I'm the editor of Logistics Business Magazine. And as always, it's a great pleasure to host this conversation. Selecting the right logistics software is crucial for optimizing operations, particularly warehouse operations. But the process goes beyond just issuing an RFI or RFP. So to help guide us through the correct process, I'm delighted to be joined today by two experts in the field. Firstly, Phil Turton, Managing Director of Viewpoint Analysis, is an independent technology consultant. Phil will be talking us through the process a business should go through to select and engage the optimal software provider. Hello, Phil, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Peter. Hi, everyone.
And joining him is Gary Taylor, the EMEA VP of Sales for Descartes Fleet Solutions, who will be sharing with us his procurement experience from the vendor's perspective. Hello to you, Gary.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Looking forward to again, a lot of engagement and certainly a very, very hot topic in the world of software at the moment.
So before we get into the meat of the subject, can I ask you, Phil, to briefly introduce yourself and just say a few words about your role?
Yeah, hi, everyone. So my name is Phil Turton. I'm the owner of a company called Viewpoint Analysis, and Viewpoint Analysis acts as a technology matchmaker. So we help customers to go from what's out there in the market and what problem have I got, how can I solve it, to selecting a vendor. And my experience, just by way of a bit of background for you, I'm an ex-enterprise salesperson. So I worked for companies like SAP, HP, Informatica, those kind of companies for about 20-some years before starting Viewpoint Analysis. So hopefully I'll give you a good perspective of what it's like to be on both sides of the spectrum when it comes to RFIs, RFPs, and how we can do things a little bit better, in my opinion.
Thanks, Phil. And so question to you, Gary.
Yeah, thanks. Again, good morning, everybody. So my role and responsibility here at Descartes is all around all things fleet, which is routing, mobile, telematics, and customer engagement and experience. I've spent roughly 10 years in supply chain and logistics technology, covering career spans at Gartner and also Verizon in kind of sort of more recent history. So yeah, a little bit about me and really looking forward to getting into the weeds and the topics of conversations around let's call it supplier and vendor and customer relationships around the RFI, RFP, and moving forward as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you both, gentlemen, and thank you also to you, the viewer, for joining us today. We really do appreciate you taking time out of your busy working day. To give you the greatest benefit from this webinar, we encourage you to submit a question to our experts using the chat function in the sidebar there, which we'll put to them at the end of the webinar if time permits. Right, time for me to shut up and to throw to Phil, who will tell us what a business should be doing to ensure they select the ideal software partner.
Brilliant. So in that brief introduction I gave you, as I say, I can see both sides of the spectrum. And when I set up Viewpoint Analysis, the whole point of that was because I wanted to be able to help customers to move quicker, to get from where they are today to getting a solution and getting on with the project. And also from a vendor's perspective, it's just really difficult. So my hope in Viewpoint Analysis really is to kind of help customers to get on with that. So first thing I would say is, I think there's a new approach to vendor selection that's really important here. IT procurement is pretty broken right now. So if you look at the latest survey from Loopio, about 35% of companies who receive an RFI or an RFP, they decline to bid. So let's think if you're an ERP requirement and SAP doesn't bid, or Oracle doesn't bid, or Microsoft Dynamics doesn't bid, or indeed if you're in, I don't know, CRM and Salesforce doesn't bid, that's a massive problem. The average vendor selection process just takes too long. It takes multiple months, sometimes years. And the problem is that companies make that the project rather than the project, and therefore it just delays everything. Vendors tend to get asked to respond to thousands of questions. And what do they do when they see that? Well, they just look at it and either give you a stock answer, or they don't bother responding and qualify out. And I just think generally in that whole process that the relationship balance is all tilted to the requirements, and rather than getting the experts to tell you what they really think. And when you're in sales, it's very difficult. So when I was in sales as an individual contributor, I might be managing about 20 or 25 different opportunities at any one time. My extended team, the pre-sales guys, the legal team, all the people that are really important, and I would say sometimes more important than sales, they're managing hundreds of opportunities. Each pursuit costs tens of thousands of pounds. And if you're in one of the top echelon vendors like SAP, for example, you know, a big brand name company, you'll be winning 1 in 3 opportunities. So that's not too bad. But if you're not, it might be 1 in 5 or 6 opportunities. So that, you know, the pursuit cost is a big decision for everybody. Nobody goes into these things lightly. And in the sales team, they generally have an annual target to hit. So obviously, if you're looking at things that are further down the line, and if your procurement process is going to go on for quite some time, then clearly those companies are going to have second thoughts about being part of it, because the sales team will be absolutely focused on closing business that's in front of them. So we've got a real kind of mismatch here. We've got on the one side the kind of technology companies who are fielding these requirements and having to be very careful about how much they're spending, where they're investing, and the opportunity cost of not investing in another project because they're working with you. And on the other hand, that kind of process that can be a project in its own right and just goes on and on and on. So I just wanted to kind of give you, I guess, my perspective on how you can do things a little bit different. And hopefully this will provoke some conversation and some comment. And I know Gary, from a vendor perspective, will have a viewpoint on this as well. And by the way, my role at Viewpoint Analysis is that we work with every single vendor in the marketplace. So we're not affiliated to Descartes. We're not affiliated to any company out there. We're trying to help our customers, my customer being the person that's wanting to buy the technology, to move through that process quickly. So if you look at the slide in front of you right now, I kind of break this down from bottom up. So when you're looking at the long list of requirements, so in other words, the market assessment, what's out there, and then at the very top, number 1, the short list. But if I just start from the bottom very briefly, the way to change the game is by doing the things that you can see on the screen right now. So for example, when you're doing that initial market assessment, that's the time to go wide and deep. You want to be talking to the major players in that marketplace. You want to be talking to the niche vendors. You want to be talking to the guys who are in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, for example. But you also want to be talking to the companies that are, you know, maybe up and coming. The way you do that and why you do that is because you're wanting to see what good is and what not so good is. And you'll only find that out from doing that market assessment piece. And we do this thing called the technology matchmaker process, which is just that. It's a very simple, how can you help us? What do you do? Quickly assess the marketplace, do a thin kind of process with everybody that you want to, and learn what's out there. The other thing I wanted to say, number 4, is you should be selling to the sales team. So bearing in mind what I said earlier, that each of these tech vendors have a decision to make as to whether or not they're going to work with you. Clearly, just throwing them a massive RFP is a really stupid, bad idea. You should be telling them why you want them to be involved. You know, why have you chosen them as part and parcel of this long list exercise? What's in it for them? What are they playing for? What's that kind of golden carrot at the end of the stick? What they're going to win if they invest? You want to be showing them that it's dead easy. This is something simple, that you care about their time, you care about their investment. You're trying to make sure that you bring all these people together and you work with them as a partner rather than a supplier relationship. The third thing is we issue what I call a challenge statement. So we just dump all those thousands of questions. And I say the problem is that the partner vendor will look at those questions and they'll either give you a copy and paste answer that they've done thousands and thousands of times before, which is pointless for you, or they'll not bid. So the way I operate is we say, put out there a challenge statement. Who are you? What do you do? How do you do it? What's the problem that you're trying to address? And let the vendors come back and tell you how they can help. Because after all, they are the experts. These guys have done this thousands and thousands of times with customers in your industry and in parallel industries as well. So ask them for their help. And then number 2, streamline everything. So again, rather than making the process the project, the best way to achieve that is just to get through things as quickly as you can. And once you've done that, you get to the shortlist. That's when you spend your time with the shortlist of partners. That's when you invite them in to really get to know your business in much more detail. That's when you get extensive demonstrations, or maybe you do, customer supplier kind of events. Maybe you look at them to bring in their viewpoints on the ROI and how they can help you build a business model. But you go long on the long list, but you go short on that short list. You don't want to be really spending much more time with the guys who aren't in your process. Don't bring people in it just to make up the numbers. Get that short list down to maybe 4 or 5 at a maximum and spend the time with them. So that, Peter, in summary, is kind of where I'm kind of coming from here. I guess what I'm trying to say is that whole piece is broken, and there's a much better way of doing it. If you follow this kind of process in the way that I work at Viewpoint Analysis, all the vendors, or almost all the vendors, will be part of the process all the way through. And that's so important, because if you start to get 1 or 2, so in this industry that we're talking about now, Descartes decide to qualify out day 1, or one of the big players, of their competitor group qualify out day 1, that's not great. You're losing somebody who could be a partner for you. So getting this right, I think, is really important.
But I wanted to ask if perhaps we can walk us through those 5 steps. In terms of sort of creating the long list, what sort of numbers are we looking at for that? And where do you go to select your vendors? Are you looking for these potential vendors?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, as I say, that long list really is not taking up the time of the vendors. So that long list, if you do it correctly, is just an initial conversation, and you might ask them to present how they can help against your problem statement. My view is, therefore, it can be as long as you need it to be. And every industry has a different kind of, set of competitors, companies that they work with in this space. So it might be 10, it might be 12, that kind of order. In terms of how you go out and look at it, obviously you can go and, you can talk to the likes of Gartners and Forresters and all those kind of companies. You can look at G2, which, with more kind of peer review and, other customers kind of reviewing them. You can look at industry information. So, for example, Viewpoint Analysis put out information. So there's a whole host of consultants that do similar things. But my view is that you should actually take from the people that you know best. So your teams, everybody on this call will have a team of people that work with them. And guess what? Those people will have probably used the technology that you're looking to buy. They'll have been in your competitors and seen how other competitors use it. They'll have used it in maybe previously in a different life completely. They'll also have a network of people that they can reach out to. So they'll be able to kind of ask questions of some of their, peer group in other areas. What have you used before? So I think in summary there, Peter, there's a whole host of ways to build that long list. But I take a lot of, you can obviously go out to the, companies like myself, but that I think is the secondary piece. The most important piece is your peer group, your colleagues, companies that you've worked with before.
And let's not forget industry publications such as Logistics Business, Phil, of course. Moving on to sort of your next slide, which was, the next level, which is selling to the sales team. So it seems like sort of soft skills here are very important, the, communication skills as well. Can you talk us perhaps a little bit more about some of the skills that are required there when you're selling to the sales team?
Yeah, I mean, I think the summary from my perspective is don't treat the vendors as though this is something that is that they should be involved in, that they should be grateful to receive, because that's not the case. As a sales manager in the case of Gary, and looking across his team, or as a sales contributor, every time that something comes across your desk, it's a difficult decision to make. Do I go for, you might be a brilliant brand, you might have a great solution that you're trying to achieve there, but, we could be really busy. I could be really busy as a salesperson. I could be working on something that could be, defining for my year and will feed my family. Yeah. So it's very important not to just assume that you can send across an RFP and that company will be grateful. you've got to really be very clear. Why are you talking to them? Why are you talking to Gary? Why have you picked up the phone? Why have you asked him to help rather than another 400 different people like Gary? I think it's sometimes difficult. So, for example, I've got a call with we've got a vendor call early October with another customer, and I've asked them to sell to the sales team, to be open and transparent and tell the companies why they can help. And it's not something that comes very easy to most people. The idea of selling to a salesperson, that's bizarre, isn't it? But it's very important. Not selling as in selling a car, but just trying to get across why it's important that you're doing the project, what you're looking to achieve, and how this company, we think right now, but we don't know, can help.
So you've got your 1,000 question spreadsheet, and we've torn it up and thrown it into the bin. And you're now going to replace that with what you'd call a challenge statement. So how do you cover so much ground in a simplified way when the 1,000 question spreadsheet existed for a reason? So how are you going to cover all of that ground?
So I don't think it did exist for a reason. I think what happens is people aren't used to buying. So what they tend to do is they look for this mythical thing called a spreadsheet of questions. And those questions, probably half of them, they don't care what the answer is. The customer really, when they're putting out something to market, care about lots of things, but not everything. And also, why would you kind of change it? Well, you do it a little bit of a different way. You try to make it a bit more simple, because in that long listing piece, we're just getting to know the vendor. We don't need to know them inside out, back to front, upside down. We just want to get to know them. Can they help us? How can they help us? And to get them to show us why they've got the experience to work with us as a company. So if, by all means, when you get to that RFP, and I have this thing called a rapid RFP, as you can guess, it's all a similar theme of moving quickly. But that RFP, you then might want to issue some questions. I just try to coach my customers that, let's look at the things that are important to you, not everything. And as I say, if you're working in the vendor, they've got some very sophisticated tools right now, where they'll store all previous questions and all the answers to previous questions. And if you're not careful, you'll get a cut and paste answer to everything. And if you want, so effectively, if you give them a spreadsheet, you will get what you've asked for, not what you need.
Right. Yeah. And so really at this stage, then we're now moving from long list to short list. And you've already specified, sort of the ideal number within that. So you're going to dig down a little deeper now into this, into your vendors. What sort of additional knowledge do you need to extract from them to get down to our one?
So you need to score appropriately, and I always say score throughout. So you've always got scoring. You can, every time you have an interaction with any of the vendors, you want to make sure you're scoring at all points. So then at the end, you don't forget everything. But I think this is where you need to become a partner, right? So you can very rarely do customers buy on price. You assume they do, but they don't, right? And very rarely do they buy just on functional fit. You assume that they do, but they don't necessarily do that. Where you do need to be very clear is, can I work? So, can I work as an individual? Can my team, can my company work with this company that we're talking to today? So it's very much about the cultural piece. It's about, can I bet, if it was my money, my mortgage, would I put it on that particular vendor that can help me? So there's a lot more that you're trying to gain at the shortlisting piece to vendor selection piece. You're wanting to have some, some cost numbers and, things that are hard, but a lot of it, in my opinion, is very soft as well. It's what you think those vendors can bring to you to the table. Do you trust them? But the other thing I would say is, when you get down to that shortlist, bring the partners in. They should be all partners at that point. None of those 4 or 5 in that shortlist should be on that list if you don't believe they can deliver a solution for you. If they're on the list and you don't think they can, you've got it all wrong. So make sure that you bring them close, get to know them, let them help you with the business case perhaps, Let them show you, other customers and introduce you to other customers. Let them show you an in-depth demonstration. Do maybe, and I don't think any vendor I've ever worked for would want me to say this, but maybe you could do a little proof of concept if you need to. So there's lots of things you can do, but what you're trying to do at that very end is find out, do I trust this business to deliver? Everything else is by the by. You're placing your one bet.
And just whilst we're on the subject of scoring, a question that we received ahead of the webinar, we've been asked what customers should be looking for. What areas should a customer be looking to score, and should some of those areas carry greater weight than any other of the areas?
So I don't think anyone should you shouldn't have extra weight on anything, because you want to look at it in the round at the end. And whoever you're presenting those numbers to, so let's say it's the chief finance officer, or in some cases it's the MD or the chief executive, they will weigh them themselves, right? So for example, when the CFO sees that your preferred vendor is twice the cost, he doesn't need, or she doesn't need, for you to know that that's twice as important. It's really important to them. Do you know what I mean? So that will fly out really. But yeah, the things that we tend to score on, and it can be different for different companies and different requirements. But functional fit, the cost, the relationship, the over experience with the sales team. There's a bunch of things that are different in every case. And I think every one of the ones I've ever done probably have had different scoring metrics, because what we want to do at the very beginning of this process is to work out what's important to us. But I just say, and by the way, very important to say, sometimes the winner isn't the winner. So they might score really well, but it comes back to that point at the end. And everybody who's gone through this process knows that once this goes up the chain and it hits the board, and for all of you that have seen this before, this is really important. When it hits the board, there will be things that happen at that board that nobody anticipates. It's Bob, who's the chief executive, who says, I've worked with them before. Why did we ever include them? They are not ever going to darken my door. Or it's from a left field perspective. It might be the HR director who heard from a neighbour that, that's never going to happen. You should never do that. I heard something bad. All sorts of things happen when they get to the top. So the scoring is important, but it's not the be all and end all. Fundamentally, it comes down to the human beings making a decision.
And is that some of that down to gut feeling as much as anything else?
I think 9 times out of 10 it is. Yeah, as I say, it all comes down to who do you trust, who's going to be your partner, and actually, I think that shakes out pretty early. There's a lot of emphasis. Most sales teams are fantastic, first class. They've all been trained really well. They're representing their companies the best they can, but you can very quickly get a feel as to, is this a company that we can work with?
Gary, I see you nodding along there, and I understand that the knowledge that's coming out of Phil is extremely valuable to all of us. But Phil's done all the heavy lifting up to this point, so I'm going to throw it over to you. And just ask for you perhaps to share some of your experiences of procurement from the perspective of a software vendor.
Yeah, for sure. First off, a lot of what Phil was talking about is first of all, as a purchaser, but also a sales rep or salesperson within an organization, a lot of that resonates with me in terms of what you were talking about. When we were talking about topics and discussion points for this particular webinar, I genuinely wrote around about 15 pages worth of notes, i.e. topics and conversations, and we could talk about this all day. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out a couple of things from my perspective from a sales organization engaging with clients in terms of how important or where should we spend some time, or things that actually maybe seem somewhat antiquated, and kind of just give some tips and some pointers where I see applicable. So the first thing I'm going to say is and somewhat a similar line is, we often at the start of any conversation need to remind a business of just the goal and objective of the particular project. Now, that could be implementing something new or replacing something old. So again, there's often a level of constant reminder of what is the goal, the singular goal and objective. Okay, now within that, you have to engage multiple business units. Now, generally speaking, there is not one product or software or solution that only impacts one team, right? And we'll take ERP. It seems like it's a finance-driven solution. It's not. It's absolutely a customer-driven solution as well, because if your invoicing is incorrect and you're sending out the wrong products, ultimately your customers are typically unhappy, right? So, engaging multiple business units along that way is super important. Now, there's, again, talking statistics, most people say you need to engage with 11 people. Actually, I kind of sort of flip it on the head. It's generally 5 business units at minimum that you would engage with. It could be finance, customer service, logistics, sales as a part of an organization. But you should always be engaging with multiple people. Now, that brings me on to a point that we often, as salespeople, come up against in any RFI and any RFP, and it's this hidden behind a spreadsheet, or this sworn secrecy around this particular project. Generally speaking, when we receive RFIs and RFPs, we have started to see a trend of change to this. But typically, what we see is only engage us through an RFI and RFP. Now, as to rule of thumb, that's not going to get you what you want to achieve as a general rule. Now, I appreciate the notion behind it, but it genuinely makes a supplier's task super difficult to actually understand what we're trying to achieve as a goal and objective, but how that's going to be achieved across multiple different business units. So I just want to sort of reference that in terms of kind of how we attack and approach it. Again, kind of carrying on the notion of, or the talk of an RFI and an RFP, they're generally focused on feature and function and requirement, not on an outcome. What is the goal and objective that you are trying to achieve, not by the replacing of software, not by the introducing of new software, but the business goal? Hey, we're looking to reduce our spend on 3PL. Again, that's in my world, in the world of logistics. I'm looking to reduce the amount of hours that we spend in our planning capacity. Great, but underneath it, there's some underlying tasks or topics that can be achieved as well. And we often spend a lot of time reminding people, and my team probably hate the phrase that I use on a very regular basis. But ultimately, software and the element and the design of software is to automate a process that is currently being done manually. The most simplistic form, it's macros, right? You're trying to do something that you repeat on a really regular basis in one click of a button. Just continue to do this, right? It's that automated decision-making process. But how do you want to achieve it? And again, this is a constant reminder. Now, I'm going to try and sort of stay on track and sort of maybe talk through a little bit of a chronological order here. But when you're looking at your RFI and your RFP documentation, okay, and we look at those 1,000 questions and we go through things, we rarely get a current day in the life of. We call it a dialogue. Now, that could be a hugely big understanding of how you operate today, which also tells us the challenge of where do we want to get to? How do you want to operate in the future? Now, sometimes they're really similar. Sometimes they're a world of difference. Again, logistics, maybe you're looking to go from central business planning, regionalized business planning into central business planning and utilization of vehicles across multiple depots. Fantastic opportunity. So it's a big change. It's a big change to make. So understanding a day in the life of and enabling an organization to do a deep level discovery to understand what is the art of possible. To a point that Phil made a little bit earlier, suppliers have typically, especially enterprise grade, have typically deployed this solution into thousands, if not tens of thousands of customers. Realistically speaking, as one business, you may have replaced or changed that technology 2 or 3 times in 15 to 20 years. The level of experience and understanding of how big that shift is absolutely encapsulated within a supplier or a vendor. So utilizing that knowledge is really important. And a discovery isn't to ask a load of questions, it's to understand, can we help? And if the answer is no, I'd like to think as an organization, myself and the rest of the team, if we can't help, hands up and say, we can't help you here. And I think that's fairly sensible around Phil's notion of, salespeople are wanting to fill their time, not with conversation, but something that's going to make a material difference or change within that business and organization. It's hugely important. Which then comes us onto what I would call the North Star. Now, again, spreadsheet hidden behind. We have this notion that we should not share competitors. Now, from my view, from a sales perspective, it's not to work out who we're up against. It's not to work out whether it's pricing. It's not to work out anything along that lines. What it's really a true measure of is, first of all, are you going to be as open as you're asking us to be as salespeople? Number one. But number two is, the ability to articulate either a unique positioning for that technology or solution that could be inherently valuable for you as a business. Or number two, to sit there and say, hey, that's your business profile. This is who you are. Do you know what? That competitor that sits in that space as their ideal customer profile is really well suited to you. Now, we talk about people moving businesses. Now, generally speaking, you see people, again, in the logistics world, once you're in logistics, you're in logistics. And that means you have a heap of knowledge that you can transferable knowledge from business to business and organization to organization. And it's the same principle within sales. We do hold and have this knowledge of existing technology because that's where we've come from, or we know the market incredibly well. And that's a huge leap. So sharing competitors, incredibly valuable. Not just for us, but for you as a business, to understand the unique positioning and actually time, to make sure that profile is whittled down as quickly as possible. And again, whistling on or whittling on, should I say, not whistling. Both parties should have skin in the game, and there is a level of investment that any project, if you're going through an RFI and RFP, it's generally speaking going to be a high value project within the organization or the business, or it's a high value spend. Generally, we'll kind of sort of see that particular world. Skin in the game from both parties. It's a mutual response and mutual respect with each other to say, we're putting our time and attention into it, spending tens and thousands, as Phil mentioned, and that's a low value opportunity, generally speaking. It's tens of thousands. What resource have we got from your side to work on this particular project? So that's key. Last couple of points. Again, on this magical spreadsheet, Phil mentioned, how do we score things? I see 3 areas that people are generally interested in. Capability, architecture and security, super important right now. And last of all, deployment and customer success. Those are the 3 things that you should really bucket and not wait. But those 3 things is, can they do all those 3 things? If the answer is yes, yes, and yes, the question is, why would we not proceed with that particular technology? Or who's better positioned to support us in those particular areas? Not, this is weighted at 30%, this is 50%, and that's 20%. It should absolutely be, can they do my 3 core goals or meet my 3 core goals and objectives? Whilst also thinking today's problem may not be tomorrow's problem. Where do we want to be in 3 to 5 years' time? So it's super valuable there. And my last piece that I think is the most critical thing that anybody should do through an RFI and RFP process most of them are positioned on one business outcome, on business goal. Use the organization, whether it's myself or any other company out there, to co-create a business case. You can bet your bottom dollar that any rep within that business, especially when we're looking at kind of mid to enterprise grade technology, has worked with an organization that has deployed their technology in the course of the last 3 to 6 months, or if not slightly longer than that, depending on their tenure, that knows where the business value has come from. And that additional bucket of value, whether it may be customer service related, whether it may be somewhere else, can be hugely valuable to turning a business case into, we spent a heap of time, no decision in terms of moving forward, to heap of decision. Wow, we didn't realize that this would have a fundamental impact on our business in that area. So use them to co-create that business case. So those are my, let's call it my 15 pages dot pointed into maybe 7 or 8 particular nuggets of gold in terms of vendor engagement around suppliers.
I think as a strong advocate for slimming things down, Phil would be very pleased to hear that you've got those 15 pages down to less than 10 minutes. Phil, have you got anything you want to respond to on that before I start asking some questions?
I think, well, yeah, I agree with pretty much everything there that Gary said. I think the one thing I kind of learned when I moved across, and I sit in between, the way I explain it, I sit between. So I'm not in sales like I used to be for 20 years. But I'm not on the vendor side either. Sorry, on the customer side either. I'm in the middle. The biggest lesson I learned was, and again, pretty obvious, but very difficult to see when you're in sales, is that all the people in the selection team have a day job. When you're in sales, you think they're just all focused on doing this thing with us. You know what I mean? The biggest challenge that you have is getting people's diary, and especially the senior people's diary. And you all, everybody else on the call knows this if you're on the other side of the fence. It's actually making sure you bring it all together. And the other thing I would say is, to Gary's point, I completely agree with opening up about which vendors you're talking to. Because and one of the ways that we do that is when we run the process I'm talking about earlier, we bring all the vendors on the call at the same time. So they all can see each other, smell each other, ask questions, and everybody's on the same level playing field. The reason that's really important, by the way, is different to what we've talked about earlier. It's actually to save those diary commitments. If you've got a team of 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 people internally who are your buying team, and we have to get in the diary of it, the CIO, the head of logistics, the head of transport, whatever it is, you have to suddenly have 14 vendors, 13 vendors, 10 vendors, whatever, times by 8 or 9 people, some senior. That's what takes a heck of a lot of time. So just when I was saying about earlier, streamlining everything, that piece of bringing everybody onto the call at the same time with all the vendors saves weeks or if not months. And it's a beautiful thing because, as Gary said, they all can then see that they're all on the same level playing field as everybody else. They all get to ask the same questions as everybody else. And it could be that Gary looks at it from Descartes' perspective, as he said earlier, and actually thinks, these guys you've got over there are brilliant. Or he can then point out to you, which is also, sometimes we see this as bad, but I think it's very important. He can also say, why have you got those guys in? Now, that's a bad idea from a sales perspective because it never looks good. But actually, all information to a buying team is useful information.
I was just going to add to that, and I'll put my hand back down here. To Phil's point of being on the same call, most people walk in the same parks or swim in the same pools as each other on a very regular basis. We're all at the same shows. We're all at the same events. We're all meeting and engaging people, even coming in and outside of potential customers' offices, and we're generally having a coffee with each other because we've built up relationships over a period of time. And as much as we like to think that all competitors clash, they generally don't. And some, especially in my case, we partner with many of our competitors in certain capacities. So first things first is hugely valuable, and you'll see some relationships forming on those calls anyway. But I did forget one vital thing, and actually it kind of sort of resonated with me there is timelines. You know, we're all super aware of how important a customer's time is, especially when you're looking at kind of the senior echelons, and getting all people on one call at the same time is very, very difficult from a diary management standpoint. The one challenge that I don't know why this didn't come up as my first point, to be perfectly honest with you, was the amount of times we'll receive an RFI on a Tuesday, the 24th of September, saying the deadline is Friday, the 27th of September, is absolutely crazy. To assume that you're going to get a deep response to, as Phil put it, your problem statement in that timescale is slim to absolutely none. You will get a bucketed response from utilizing solutions of RFP generators or previous responses where we've seen exactly the same thing, just to hey, get us through to the next stage. And that's not always the right thing to do, but that's how people will look at it. So setting timelines, don't send an RFI or an RFP out with 1,000 lines with 4 days to do it. Give 2, 3, 4 weeks in many cases if you want to get the responses in a curated form that answers your problem statement in the most effective fashion. So again, timelines is super important.
Yeah, really good point. And I have to say, this one call idea does sound like a souped up version of The Apprentice or Dragon's Den, and it's certainly something I'd love to be able to witness. So I just wanted to say to our audience, there's an opportunity to ask our experts questions now using the chat function. So please take that opportunity now. A couple of questions of my own here. So wanted to just sort of move into implementation, and that possibly moves slightly away from you, Phil, from your area of expertise. So Gary, I just wondered, when it comes to implementing a solution, how do you win over sort of hearts and minds of the customer? Again, is it sort of communication there?
Yeah, I mean, well, first thing, hearts and minds in terms of the project should always be won very, very early, in terms of way before decision. That's not fixated around hearts and minds of an implementation process, because it should realistically be a continuation of the engagement that you've had all the way through. I often relate to my sales team is, if you say yes to every opportunity, the reality is that a customer is going to expect you to say yes at every other opportunity thereafter. There's always a point to say, hey, we can't do that, but we can do this, and often that's either a blocker for a customer to say, well, you're not doing what we're asking. It's like, well, what you're asking is X and Y, and maybe there's a reason why we have to do it in a slightly different way. So again, there's the communication piece should be answered way before implementation. I think the single most important thing from a project implementation, specifically around projects that we're involved with, so routing, mobile, telematics, is resource allocation and timescale management. I compare ERP solutions as the heart, and I compare routing, mobile, telematics solutions as the lungs of any individual, any business. And so it's not an overnight, click and fix. We're implemented. We're all connected up. We're off and away. There's a huge amount of work that goes into not just the planning, the project documentation and the design, all the way through to the actual build and configuration of a solution. That requires resource not just from a supplier. It also requires the resource from a customer, and that has to be mutually agreed upon at every particular stage. So, element of communication of what is actually going to be required to achieve this particular common goal. But second of all is make sure that resource is available at the time points or the time frames that were pre-agreed. And the moment you hit those, all of a sudden that steam train starts to pick up pace much, much quicker, rather than having little breakpoints through a particular project, which loses all momentum, and losing momentum loses confidence, and losing confidence ends in either a no-go of deployment and a delay of deployment, or it typically ends up in we've missed something, let's add it on later. We've missed something, we'll add it on later. So again, it's just that misalignment or the let's put it another way, the proper alignment of resource allocation through a project, very, very critical for me.
And I guess, Phil, we've talked, or you've talked in detail about things leading up to day one. But in your scoring system, you're going to have to take into account how that vendor is likely to perform post day one. And I guess that's, again, down to, KPIs and that sort of stuff.
It is. And also reference studies as well, reference calls. So if you've spoken to people and you've seen that they've done this before, and you then get a sense for how they're going to do it and also what process they follow, that's really important. But until it happens, I don't think there's, we can do a lot in that pre-sales piece, assessing their performance. But then when it comes to actually delivery, you don't know until they start day one, do you? But you hope those pieces that we talked about earlier, that gut feel, who can we work with? What's the kind of feeling towards them? You would hope that's then set you in good stead, because once that comes around, the cost doesn't really matter anymore, does it? And some of those things that you've scored on, it's then about, can we work together? And hopefully you've chosen the right partner. You'll soon quickly find out if you haven't.
I bet you will, yes. Now, you did talk us through very successfully about the sort of the challenges and the hurdles and all sorts of things that need to be overcome kind of before we dig too deep into the process. What in your experience are the sort of the common missteps that businesses make when they're procuring a software partner that you bang your head against the wall saying, I can't believe they're still doing that, or they've done that again?
Yeah, I think it's just simple things, isn't it? So Gary touched on some of these. But to give you an idea, so, always always tell the people you're going to be sending the document out to, whatever the document is, that it's coming ahead of the time, right? So you will be absolutely shocked how many times an email pops up in a salesperson's inbox, and you didn't know anything about it. So, good chances you're not going to respond to that. As Gary said as well, just being unrealistic. Unrealistic means they qualify out as well. If they think that you're being difficult, if it's going to be over Christmas that they need to work on this, and again, they've not heard anything about it before, that's a real issue. And I think as well, just doing the due diligence on the vendors. So there's big companies, small companies, middle-sized companies. How much money do they spend on things like R&D? Are they in profit? And where is the funding coming from? Because all that is really important. I had a call with a vendor the other day that told me that they've got funding until 2029. And that was sold to me, by the way, as a real benefit. Now, clearly, the thing that goes through my head and also through my customer's head is, so actually, we've got 5 years potentially working with you, but you can't guarantee any longer than that. So it's some of those things, that fundamental piece that you need to look at as well. Is this a viable business? Is this a company that's going to be around for the long term? Are they investing in the technology, or are they just taking profit from it? Things like that.
And Gary, you got anything to add to that at all in terms of sort of some of the areas where perhaps people coming to you with tenders are kind of misreading the steps that they're taking?
I've probably got loads of examples of that, but I probably want to take one, if it's okay, just one little step back to something Phil was talking about, and specifically about the relationship with a vendor and a supplier, that partnership-driven thing. And funny enough, it's kind of resonated with me. I had an RFI call Friday last week, and it was probably one of the best questions I've ever been asked in an RFI discovery. And that question was, can you tell me the last time that you as an organization had an issue with either a go live, a project documentation, a misalignment in project scope, or a missed deadline? And then they followed up with the next question of, how did you deal with it? Now, that for me was one of the most forward-thinking, eye-opening RFI discussions that I think I've had in many, many years. Because in reality, it's not about the problem, it's how you deal with it that is more valuable as an organization. And really, that's going to get the gut of who are we getting into bed with? And I say that in a sense of who are we going to have a relationship with for the next 3, 5, 9, 20 years, which is exactly where again, we look to in the future from a partnership standpoint. So, so apologies, didn't mean to sort of skirt the question, but I really wanted to go back and talk about value. You know, what value are you bringing? Because it's not just about the product you're bringing, it's about your experience and, the type of business that you're engaging with is incredibly important to help, co-create, whether it's a solution or co-problem solve. Hey, we've got this problem together. We're on a path to going live here. How did you fix that problem? And that's very, very important when it comes to enterprise grade technology.
Yeah, we hear it a lot, don't we? I can do business with these guys, but can I do business with these guys when things start going wrong? How are they going to react? How are they going to behave? Yeah, that's a really good point. So I'm looking at the clock, and time is unfortunately ticking on remorselessly, as it does. So I'm going to suggest, as we're reaching the end of our allotted time, just wondered if I could just throw back to you, Phil, just to summarize in a few words, if you could. What are the sort of the steps a business should take to onboard a successful software partner? Sort of summarizing what we've been talking about today.
Yeah, as I said, I think, make it structured, make it easy, ask the vendors for their response to your challenges, score it throughout, don't make the selection process the project. And remember, I think from my perspective, I always think that every single project is kicked off by some senior business leader giving approval. You want to make sure that you get to that point where he or she can approve it before they lose interest and before something more important comes along. It might be new carpets for the office. It might be a fleet of new delivery trucks. It might be new tires for the delivery trucks. There's always something that suddenly becomes more pressing. When you've got that opportunity to go and get permit, when you've got the permission to go and buy something, get through that process and get on with the project is my feedback. So yeah, that would be the summary, I think.
And Gary, from the vendor perspective, you've got an RFP landed. What's the advice that you would give to somebody in that position?
Discuss it. Have an open conversation around an RFI and RFP. What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to get out of the particular project? Don't hide behind a spreadsheet, a document, a tender portal. Open those lines of communication and keep them open. The moment that you close those lines of communication, or you restrict the engagement with from let's call it a sales rep or a vendor and yourself as a customer, that generally hinders two things. One is business case validation. Does this actually make sense? Yes or no? And we're talking about somebody senior signing something off to say, yep, we're going to press ahead with that new fleet of vehicles. But actually, what are the additional benefits to that just go beyond maybe the fuel efficiency of the new the new Volvo wagons as an example? What are the other byproducts? Hey, it's brand reputation. Okay, what does that do? Safety. There's always this heap of other stuff in there, which again a rep can validate. The second thing is how vested you are. Is how vested we are. If we feel, and again, it's that gut feeling. It's the can we do business with them? It's do we want to do business with them? And the moment that you get slapped an RFI and an RFP and said you've got 4 days, the question is, my back is against that wall, and I have to make a very, very quick decision whether we can or we can't do that, or I'm going to give you some very generic answers, none of which is a positive experience from a customer perspective. Well, it's driven by the way that engagement is driven. So, again, engage, talk, open up, and make that felt through the whole business and the whole team, not just, maybe a select 2 or 3 people in that particular process. Let's say.
Thank you very much for that very astute summary. Now, sometimes people are a little bit shy to participate. We haven't had any questions come in today. If anyone wants to raise a hand and ask a question, I can bring you in on audio. Now's the chance to do that. I've seen some good reactions coming from our audience as well, with some thumbs up here and there. So thanks very much for that engagement. But if no one wants to find out any more, then probably it's a good point for me to bring things to a close. And I just wanted to thank you both, Phil and Gary, for your excellent contribution today. And also thank you to you, our great viewers, for joining us today and engaging with our experts. So remains for me to say goodbye to you, Phil, and thank you very much for your insights. And
Bye, everyone.
And goodbye to you also, Gary. And thanks for your input today and on this very interesting topic. And it remains also for me to say goodbye from me, Peter McLeod, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate your time, and thanks everyone for joining.